there's one, Isobel, one, maybe give a quick answer on this. There's a question from Maria saying, basically, she says there's a lot of unknowns in the media. The picture about what's really happening in the war between Ukraine and Russia is unclear. What is the state of play? I mean, my sense of the state of play is that Russia is going forward slowly, but surely in the east, sort of village by broken village, and it's using the fact that it's got more infantry, more aviation, more armored vehicles to kind of overwhelm Ukrainian resistance, in particular to kind of bomb with glide bombs Ukrainian forward posts. So yeah, Ukraine is losing territory, but there's not a kind of collapse. Isobel, how do you see it briefly?
So I definitely agree with you and Yulia on the sort of resistance front, and that if there was a collapse in the front line, which I'll get onto in a moment, whether Russia even has the troops to occupy, because it actually takes a lot of troops to occupy a territory of this size, is probably unlikely. But I mean, I wrote a piece which came out when Trump was inaugurated about what would happen if Trump cut the funding, and the presidential administration people who work there basically said the front line would collapse. Because I do think, but having said that, it doesn't mean an immediate occupation of the entire country. It could just be a large breakthrough in one part of the front line. And perhaps by that point, because the EU are planning to kind of, or talking about, as they tend to talk a lot, to step up their defense spending and to kind of substitute US aid. So maybe whenever that does happen, and depending on how the US administration, what steps they take, maybe it could be some sort of coordinated transition where the EU substitutes the US aid. But I don't think it will be great for Ukraine, especially if mobilization can't pick up. I think that's going to be another issue. And again, that's not to blame Ukrainians for anything. It's just a really, really difficult situation. Yeah.
Okay. So look, here's another question from Andy, and to both of you, but keep it super quick because it's absolutely speculative. But he says, can one of you take a stab at predicting how a settlement could come about? What would it involve? In other words, how might this war end? I mean, all wars end eventually. I'm skeptical this Trump peace process is going to end the war, but how could the war end, or how will the war end? Briefly.
Luke,
Why
don't you go, Luke?
Oh, you want me to go? Okay. Well, so all right. My answer to this question is, I think the war will end in Moscow, and I don't know how or when, but I just think that I mean, I spent 4 years in Russia, reporting as the Guardian's kind of Moscow bureau chief until I got kicked out in 2011, and the regime, for all of its sort of pomposity and lying and kind of criminal energy, is more brittle, more precarious than it seems. And I think the proof of that happened when Yevgeny Prigozhin, Putin's close ally and the guy who founded Wagner, revolted and with his men seized the southern Russian town of Rostov-on-Don and began this kind of this trundle up the motorway to Moscow. And Putin, of course, who's a coward, kind of ran away and hid, as did his FSB spy agency. So I'm not suggesting there's going to be a palace coup against Putin. I think the oligarchs, the bureaucracy, they support him still, but I sort of feel at some stage something may give in Russia, and that would perhaps give Ukraine pause and actually change the dynamics of this conflict. I don't know, Yulia, do you have a better scenario or a different scenario?
I wish I have a scenario. The only thing I'm sure about that it's not gonna over this year or even the next one.
Sure.
as it was started with such a huge amount of blood. It never ends quickly. And unfortunately, we already passed this 10 years period of time. So we would not be the first war in the modern history. So I also have a feeling about internal problems in Russia, and I'm wondering about Chechnya and Dagestan and lots of other national minorities which were repressed by Russians, and I'm wondering how do they feel and would they like to step in this fight. But it's not something what I or we all could control. Yeah, probably the only thing I don't truly believe that these talks and agreements will over the war itself, even in the active phase. I don't believe in this. In the nearest future, not at all.
I agree with you. I mean, my view is that sort of Putin's goals for Ukraine are as maximalist as ever, that he basically wants to take as much territory as possible. He wants to get rid of Zelensky. This now seems to be a co-project with him and Donald Trump to kind of push Zelensky out and find either a weaker leader or a pro-Russian leader or someone else that can be undermined and manipulated. And, you know, Russia has formally annexed 4 Ukrainian regions, including areas it doesn't actually control. But you can see that even if Zelensky were to kind of give those regions to Russia, then of course Russia would demand more regions, you know, never-endingly.